The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the different parts of the world. This is Krishna Vedula, and actually I'm at the ASE conference in Tampa. Several of you may be also here. So the webinar today, the global webinar, is by, let me introduce our speaker who's ready to get started, Dr. B. Ramakrishna. He is the director of the Grand Challenges Scholars Program Network at the National Academy of Engineering in Washington, D.C. And the title of the talk will be, as publicized, inspiring and preparing the next generations of engineers to address the global grand challenges. He has a very distinguished background. He received his PhD in solid state science from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras in 1982. He joined the faculty of Arizona State University in 1985. From 2011 to 2016, he was the Diane and Gary Tucker Professor of Material Science and Engineering and a member of the Humanitarian Engineering faculty until his transition to Emeritus Professor in 2016. In 2013 to 14, he was awarded the Jefferson Science Fellowship to serve as a senior and science and technology advisor to the Office of the Secretary of State. Since 2017, he has been at the National Academy of Engineering in Washington, D.C. as the director of the Grand Challenges Scholars Program Network, which he is currently in that position. His main responsibilities are to broaden and deepen the impact of the program across the U.S. and around the world by forging partnerships between universities, professional societies, industries, civil societies, and government. So we really appreciate and thank you for being with us, Rama. And I'm going to give you the screen. And so you can click show my screen and you can get your presentation started. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Hello everyone, and thank you, Krishna, for organizing this. This is really, I've been enjoying every seminar that I can attend and learning a lot as well. And I'm happy to share some of my perspectives during this seminar. So as the title says, it's this program and also similar other programs are basically trying to prepare the next generation of engineers to address the challenges that society is facing. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about where I'm from, if people may not be fully aware of it. So I'm from the National Academies of Engineering, Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It's now called, all three together. It was founded during the time of Lincoln in 1863, and about 100 years later, the National Academy of Engineering was kind of separately founded under the same charter in 1964, and about 50 years after that, National Academy of Medicine. So the focus of the National Academy of Engineering is, as you see on the left, is three things, advancing engineering innovation, that research and policy and so on are part of that, research policy, ensuring talent, that is education and capacity building is part of that, the second one, and the third is policy advice and public understanding of engineering, which are very, very important for our profession to, to flourish. So those are the three things that we do, and they're all, synergistic with each other. So basically, the two takeaways I want you to get. I thought I'll put it right up in the front so that, in case I wander away from these two, you can, take me back there. So one is, what are these grand challenges, and where did they come from? A little bit of the kind of the history and the philosophy of it. Second is the educational program, the scholars program. That's kind of the one set of takeaways. The second set, in fact, perhaps more important even, is that there are other grand challenge-like initiatives that are also similar. I'll mention a few of them, and then how these are global, and so the approach to this challenge and also the capacity building also has to be global in scope. So that's kind of the second big takeaway. And as engineers, we have to be focused on the kind of meeting the needs of the people on the planet. Students are inspired by these kind of challenges, so it's kind of a good framework for education. Employers are looking for students, and these are things that you are already familiar with, but I just put it up here. And then the last one, I think, the partnership with synergistic initiatives, and I'll mention UN Sustainable Development Goals, peace engineering, humanitarian engineering, and a few others that are similar. And so the fact that we are all in this together, and so to work in concert with each other, and then capitalize on each other's networks, knowledge, and talents is one that I hope we'll continue to do more. It's not enough what we're doing now. I hope it's going to be much more. And these seminars are a great way of inspiring that partnership. So a little bit about the Grand Challenges, where they came from. Around the turn of the 21st century, the National Academy was tasked with kind of reporting on what was the great achievements of engineering in the 20th century. So they were asked to say, what are the 20 great achievements of 20th century? And as you can see here, the names are very familiar to you, the ones who were leading this effort, Neil Armstrong, as well as Arthur C. Clarke. They came up with this wonderful book and also a website, accompanying website that I love for purposes of including it in my class teaching for freshmen or sophomore at that level. And so this coffee table book is something that I highly recommend people to get. There's also a website associated with it. So they came up with 20 great challenges, and the first one was electrification, and number 13 is computers, and so on. So I just encourage you to go a little bit more into that. And then after that, if you look at what is happening in the 21st century, I just put out a few publications here. And this book, High Noon, I really like it a lot. It was written by a vice president of the World Bank, who is both an economist and a technology person, Richard. And he said in 2002, 20 global problems and 20 years to solve them. We are almost there, 2019, and this title could continue to stay. 20 global problems and 20 more years to solve them, because we have made some progress, but not enough. The other book that is on the right side is Tom Friedman's book that I'm sure a lot of you have read it with great. And then there's a follow-on book as well from Tom a few years after that. And then National Academy has put out a couple of other reports, the Engineer of 2020 that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and then a companion one a year later, Educating the Engineer of 2020. So all of these are kind of informed, thinking about what is engineering and what is the engineer of 21st century should look like. Then in 2008, this NSF gave an award to National Academy of Engineering to look at what are the great achievements of the 21st century. But that particular task was quickly changed because we cannot, predict 5-10 years, let alone a whole 100 years. So instead of that, what they kind of focused on is what should engineering focus on in the 21st century, not necessarily what are the achievements. So that led to this book and report. And as you said, I'll go back here. So the three main things: inspiring, challenging, and educating. So those are the three kind of the main focus. This is available as a PDF at the website that is there below. And first of all, to inspire, engineers are, I might, maybe I'll speak for myself, not so inspiring, and we could be more inspiring. I think it's one of the greatest professions that one could be in, but unfortunately, we are not communicating that to the youth and to the public at large. So I thought, let's take a line from an artist or in this case a playwright. Let's say what they say about things and how well they say it. This is actually a carving that's there in DC, at NIH actually. You see things as they are and say why, and in parentheses is what I wrote. It's not what Judge Bernard Shaw wrote. But I dream things that never were and say why not. And I would say that the first one is what is science, but the second is engineering. So I think this kind of inspirational definition of engineering is what we need. And so one such was actually found by or come up with the National Academy. It says very short. It has to be, first of all, less than 10-15 words. Otherwise, vision and inspiring will kind of evaporate. So engineers create solutions for the welfare of humanity and the needs of society. So it's a powerful vision statement for engineering, especially for the 21st century. And there are a couple of value proposition words that I want to mention there. Create is one, creation is one, solutions is another, humanity and society. Those are the four. The reason I pointed that out was engineering is often defined, as sometimes as application of science and engineering and math, science and math principles and knowledge to practical problems and things like that. So it's not as inspiring as I would say. It's not as inspiring, but problem solvers, engineers are problem solvers is another way that people say it. But I would say engineers are creators of solutions is much more inspiring, because creativity is, I think, it's the core of engineering. And solutions being in plural automatically means that you have context automatically involved, culture, economic, socioeconomic, history and state, etc. And then always keep in mind that we are here to serve society. So that's kind of the takeaway message of this particular definition, I would say. And then afterwards, what should the engineering focus on in the 21st century? So again, another vision statement, which is again is very short, less than 15 words, said continuation of life on the planet, making our world more sustainable, safe, healthy, and joyful. So there are four major themes: sustainability, safety, health, and the joy of life. So it's amazing that the joy of life was added on, and this was in 2008, and that really captures my imagination. And then following this vision statement, there was a set of goals that were come upon, and many of you are familiar with the 14 grand challenges, specific ones. But those are just exemplars, not meant to be exclusive. At that point in time, they thought that is important. And then from that, to reach those goals, you have a couple of objectives. One is kind of the pushing the R&D frontiers to address some of these challenges, the technical aspects and so on. Excuse me. And the other one is building the talent, inspiring the next generation. I'll talk a little bit about both of these things. First, the technical. So as I mentioned, these four major themes, and I was trying to show it in a way that they're kind of cross-cutting and overlapping, not like silos. Because if you take an example of, let's say, sustainability, clean water, it has implications on health, obviously, and also on security. In many parts of Africa, for example, fetching water can be quite a dangerous mission for, and many of them are women and girls involved in doing that on a daily basis. So just as an example. So these four themes have under them, you can say, energy, environment, and all the ones I mentioned here. We can go into more details if maybe question and answers. So what does make something grand, and what does make it a challenge? So I was looking at, and social scientists have thought of this, and this is a person from the University of Washington, has written a lot about grand challenges, and I love this one because it says it has to be imaginable, and that means feasible from the point of view of science and engineering, but not quite at hand. It's just over the horizon. That makes it kind of a a challenge, but it's also not so outrageous that you cannot reach it at all or something like that. Time travel could be an example that you can say it's a challenge, but I think at the present moment it probably is not feasible. And the other one is the impact it has on society. If it has deep societal impact, then it makes it grand. So these are the two kind of criteria for making it a grand challenge. It has to be a handful, because if it's just a litany of 100 challenges or something, then it loses its value. It has to inspire and galvanize imagination of the field and focus its effort at all aspects of its efforts over several decades. So something like this was done in the 19th century by a mathematician, Hilbert. So that was where the grand challenge word came. And Hilbert's problems was some of them are still not solved, but it has galvanized mathematicians to work on them. So this is kind of the definition. In the case of the grand challenges, I would like to kind of compare it to the Maslow's hierarchy a little bit about how sustainability, security, health, and enriching life, the joy of living, kind of build on each other in this kind of a pyramidal structure. And I even added one more, which is self-actualization, which could be more from the kind of what we are going through now with the fourth industrial revolution. And you can see the 14 grand challenges identified here, making solar energy economical and providing access to clean water there from the sustainability bucket, security, both cyber security or preventing natural disasters or mitigating their effects is from security aspect, and health is better medicines, informatics and things like that. And then enriching life has other ones that you can see there. Advanced personalized learning is one I really appreciate a lot was being added. I just thought I'll put a few other slides from other ways of thinking about both what's happening in science technology as well as what is needed in education. So this slide is from the World Economic Forum. And so what makes this particular time in history different from the other industrial revolutions that are mentioned here? First one in the 18th century, second is kind of the mid-19th, and then mid to late 20th is the third industrial revolution, more based on computers and communication. But what's happening now is some completely different. It's a qualitatively different. It's not just an incremental change. And so I think it's changing the way we live, in fact, even to the point of what it is to be human even. And then it's the confluence of various emerging technologies, and we have heard of the nano, bio, info, cogno. Those are the four big areas, and combining all of those. And you have now AI, which is kind of making I would say, a second or maybe the final resurgence after a kind of a winter of AI for 20, 30 years in the late 80s to the 2000s. But now I think machine learning, deep learning, and also the computational power and also big data, they have kind of combined together to create a new and more real revolution in AI. So I think all of these are kind of coming together. That's what is unique about this time. If you look at the way things are progressing, both technology as well as information, and this from Tom Friedman, this particular slide, and you can look at it, the technology and even population you can put on the top is exponentially rising like that. Hopefully population will kind of taper off at about 10 billion by 2050, but technology is changing. It's not only rapidly changing, but the rate of growth is also increasing. So that's what is shown by this the top curve in this thing, and the the axes are basically not put on any time, which is arbitrary. And so just to kind of be safe about predicting and all these types of things, just take out the actual numbers from this thing, just have some kind of relative numbers there. Whereas the way that we deal with problems, the way we educate our students, etc., is kind of, I would say, maybe more linear, not keeping up with this intense exponential change. And so what was happening is this gap is ever increasing, and I think it's very dangerous. And this is also was mentioned by the Joseph Richard's book in High Noon I mentioned earlier from the World Bank, the same kind of a gap. And so what I think, at least for education, we have to bend the curve in the bottom and look at new ways of education and transforming. So that's what I want to kind of take away from this particular slide. You need movements. And then the other thing I like is also this philosophy that was captured in this character. It's called Wei Ji, which combines both, it's one word for crisis in Chinese. And the crisis has two characters. The first character says challenge, and the second one is opportunity, and they have to come together. So it's something that I also emphasize to my students, saying that this is perhaps one of the greatest times to be learning to be an engineer, be educated to be an engineer, because for the first time, you perhaps understand where all the challenges are coming from, because maybe 25, 50 years ago, we didn't understand so much about global warming or other challenges, cyber security, for example, things like that. But now there is some understanding. And secondly, there's also the tools for the first time that's available to even address them. So I think both the challenge and the opportunities have come together. And one of the things that really surprised me was this quote was given by John Kennedy when he was running for president in 1959. It's an amazing. So I thought it would be nice to put that in here. Now I'm going to go to the second part, the talent building, how to inspire the next generation of the same thing. So, we as engineers rightly focus on the technical skills and the knowledge that engineers have to be, inculcated. Excuse me. But that's not enough for them to be engineers, let alone be leaders in the 21st century. So these 5 competencies were mentioned in 2009 by Yanis Yotsors, many of you know, from USC, Rick Miller from Olin College, and Tom Katsoulias from who was then at Duke. They came up with this Grand Challenge Scholars Program in 2009, and then they identified these 5 as important competencies that, in addition to the technical competencies that you have. And people had thought about something like this before. The IBM had the T-shaped engineer, but way back in the 70s and 80s, but it did not really take off because I think it was not grounded in a lot of research and stuff, which came much later in the early 2000s. So where are these 5 coming from? They're not just pulled out of the hat. Research creativity, multidisciplinary business, global, and social consciousness. So I want to go back to the rationale. Where are they coming from? Engineers create solutions for welfare of humanity, needs of society. So it clearly says that the solutions have to be feasible and they have to be viable from the business economic kind of sense, and they have to be desirable by society. And so the confluence of all 3 is what is required. And if you then look at these value propositions that I mentioned in this definition, then you can go back to the competencies. The creativity comes from the create solutions, and then the needs of society. Global would necessarily mean you need to have multicultural kind of a mindset. Viability, the business entrepreneurship. And then society, again, the social consciousness piece comes from society. Then the fact that multidisciplinarity is that these are not technical problems anymore. Sometimes the technology is already there, but these are socio-technical, economic, cultural kind of problems, and you have to be, as an engineer, to be at least familiar with and able to work with these other social scientists and humanitarians and so on and so forth, humanities, people from humanities. So I think that's where the 5 competencies come from. And then the Grand Challenge Scholars Program is cannot be an additional set of 5 courses that people need to take to be deemed as a Grand Challenge Scholar. But I think that is not possible to add because engineering curriculum is already fairly tight. And so these are a combination of curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular, which are outcome based. They're not prescribed by any set of courses, but what is the outcome of those experiences? Most of them are experiential learning that students nowadays are asking for, in fact, demanding, and we are trying to, as educators, trying to provide them. And the other thing has to be flexible, because if it has to be implemented, even across the U.S. or certainly around the world, it has to take into account the ecosystems everywhere, and there are different, and the needs are different, the culture is different, education systems often are very different, and so institutions can design their own unique programs, but keeping true to the vision. So that's the other flexibility is the kind of a cornerstone of this program. The other thing I would say is it's not enough to get these 5 experiences in disparate ways. Like, you do service in one kind of aspect, research in some other one, business entrepreneurship in yet another one. But if they are focused and if they're connected and coherent, that is, let's say if all of these 5 are under a theme of sustainability or security like that, then it's a much richer experience for a student. And the reflective part of how they connect with each other is what really the learning and the real transformations take place at the intersections of these things. So I think that's another key element of this, that these programs are have to be designed to ensure coherence and connectivity. And what the NAE does is helps connect us to the institutions to think about these things while they're developing the program, and also afterwards by sharing information with each other and creating, convening them, regularly, and so on and so forth. I want to just now go to the other Grand Challenge like initiatives, and here I've given an example of Sustainable Development Goals, the UN, which was embraced by, more than 200 countries as frameworks for development in their own countries. And these are not just developing countries, but or poor or rich countries, but all, including, Japan, Norway, and, Germany, and so on and so forth. Hi. So let me see. And then so here it shows the mapping of the 17 UN SDGs, that's to the 4 themes of the Grand Challenges. So that's kind of one quick slide. And then there are other, did I lose my ability to go to the next slide?
No, you're fine. You just have to look for it in the bottom left. Do you have it?
Bottom left.
Yeah, there you go. Left on the arrows are there. That's one. Yeah.
So along with the challenges, there is also the competencies that this is a publication from UNESCO that says what are the kind of competencies that the youth require for addressing the SDGs, and these are things that we can now clearly see, cross correlation with what engineers, what we think engineers like, systems thinking is kind of the core competency of engineering, for example. Integrated problem solving, that's, for example, so the critical thinking is everybody kind of knows it's important. So those are other things that are also aligned. So not only the challenges themselves are aligned, but also the competencies are aligned. And then in the case of peace engineering, this I took from Bernard Amadei's presentation, at the Peace Engineering Conference, the papers he wrote. And, he says, these are the kind of the minimum what peace engineering should give engineering students, to be global citizens, and other things that are here: systems thinkers, competent in tools using complexity sciences, etc. And also he adds diplomacy and policy as well. So if you look at some of these that other initiatives are bringing, there is also good synergy. So my main message here is that there's a lot of synergy with aligned programs, and so let's take advantage of it, work together, and so on. So again, I just want to put these 4 reports that have informed these 5 competencies that the Grand Challenges Scholars Program is promoting. And then so I'm saying here that let's take advantage of the synergy and say how can we use this model, the Grand Challenge Scholar programs, but adapt it as needed, and it's not like a cookie cutter program that you can just incorporate every place in the world, but make it flexible, make it effective and valuable, and to create the workforce to address these Grand Challenge like initiatives. So that's kind of my main takeaway. I thought I'll add this cartoon I saw that during this is from high school to college, and then to workforce at the very end. So we have students going through all kinds of standard procedures, and also curricula to get into college and engineering. And then once you get out and then work, employers are looking for, hey, I want you to be very well rounded. So I think there is a disconnect here, and I think the college is where we can actually achieve this. And as I said, both students are demanding it and employers are demanding it. I think the rate limiting step is the college or engineering education at the undergraduate level. So we can do better. I've used this quote. This is my first name for those of you who like to know my first name, Bindiga Navale. That's from a small town. I like this quote. I took it from of course, started with I think, therefore I am, that everybody is familiar with. But I added these 2. I blink, therefore I am, and I link, therefore we are. Because I think it's going from kind of the physical at the very top, blinking, and therefore I'm living kind of thing, and thinking is kind of the more mental, and then the third is the social. I think we need to be really at the social level now, not enough just to have the first 2 in terms of creating the engineers. So I guess I'll stop here and then hope to have a a nice discussion with all of you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Outstanding presentation and very thought-provoking. I pulled aside a few people into the kind of informal panel discussion session here for panelists, and so I'm going to go to each one of them for just a few seconds if they would like to make some comments as we move forward, and then I'll also then request other participants to send text questions, and I have some already received them, and I will start reading them out a little bit at a time. So let's start with Ramiro. You want to take a little time to add a little value to this? I'll go with Ramiro, then we'll go to Michael Milligan is with us from ABET, and then we have Bill Williams and Ala, and then we got, of course, Roger Hadcraft. So are you able to unmute? Ramiro, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Rama. Excellent presentation, and I think you did a wonderful job tying all the different initiatives and together with the Grand Challenges, the peace engineering movement that has started and it's growing quite rapidly. And like I said, we'll continue to collaborate with you. So I just want to congratulate you and for tying everything together. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ramiro. Michael, do you want to? Michael Milligan, do you want to take a few seconds?
I can do. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead,
Okay,
Michael.
great.
Yeah.
So listen, just quickly, I think, yeah, you were spot on, especially with the curriculum and the flexibility and so forth. Because I think one of the key things about all of this, focus on sustainable development and just saving the planet and so forth is really good ways to integrate it into the discussion during classes and so forth. And rather than, again, add on to sort of, dedicating specific, courses to this topic, but to interweave it into everything that we do. So thanks very much. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I think I should have put the 7 ABET criteria. I'm sorry, I should add that. And so that's again completely aligned. What ABET is saying is important for the engineers of the 21st century. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
That has also been evolving, over time, in terms of focusing on, larger and then a smaller set, and also including these, global and entrepreneurial pieces clearly in the ABET criteria. Thank you.
So that was Michael Milligan from ABET. I'm going to go to Australia here with Roger Hadcraft. Can you unmute yourself? I'm going to give you a chance to say a few things if you would like to. And then we got Bill Williams in Portugal. Do you want to come in, Roger? Your thoughts?
Okay. I hope everyone can hear me. Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity, and Rama, thanks very much for your presentation. It was terrific to see all those ideas stitched together. I think many of us have grappled with those challenges over the last 15 years or so. I know from my own perspective that the big challenge is making change happen in our universities, because we work with colleagues who are deep technical specialists, and that's what they want to teach. And what we also need are professors of practice who understand those 5 integrative skills that you've talked about. And maybe some progress has been made at some of your universities, but I think pretty limited hires of that kind in universities around the world. And I think that's our big opportunity, is to see this transdisciplinary skill being developed as a key research area, so that we can recruit the right sorts of people to teach these integrative skills.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. Go ahead, Rama. Comments?
Thank you, Roger. I forgot to mention that this movement, remember I said it started in 2009, has been very slowly growing till 2016, where there was about 23 universities around the world which had this program, approved program. But now it's almost 80 approved programs. In fact, 2 of them in Australia, University of New South Wales, which is the flagship, I would say flagship technical institution correct me if I'm wrong. And then the Australian National University in Canberra. So those are the two that have adopted this program recently. Western Sydney is there, and then I think Adelaide, they're in the process of applying. So I think we need a global, embrace of this concept. Otherwise, you will not be able to solve these global challenges. So that's absolutely, I 100% believe that. And any help that you can, all the people around the globe who are on the call here, I would very much appreciate working with all of you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Roger. I'm going to go to Bill Williams, Portugal. I'm going to unmute you. Come in, Bill.
Yeah. Thank you, Krishna. As Roger said, Rama, that was really valuable, the way that you put all those different initiatives in a kind of structure that makes sense to us. But as you were speaking, I remembered recently I was visiting a university which has a big commitment to all the undergraduate engineering students spend some time working on Grand Challenges. And the dean said to me in conversation, he said, we regularly bring in people from industry. And recently I was speaking to a senior person in industry, and he said to me, it's fantastic what your students are doing, but I'm just a bit afraid that if one of your students came to my company, they'd find it kind of boring. My point is, I couldn't agree more that this is the way to go in terms of preparing future engineers, etc. However, we have data that show that most engineers in most engineering enterprises spend a relatively small proportion of their time on innovation, creation, creative new ideas, etc. And what I'm a bit concerned about is the aspects of engineering like due diligence, maintenance, efficiency gains, which all create value for the enterprise, for society. My question is, do you think there's a danger that we might be preparing the engineers of the future in such a way that they think real engineering is tackling the grand challenges, and perhaps give less priority to due diligence and all those other value-creating engineering activities? That's my question.
Great comment and question, Bill. Rama, you have a comment on that?
Good question. I think there are two answers I can give you. One is this program that and has these kinds of competencies being stressed is being instituted in colleges and universities to only, I would say, maybe 5% of the students. Because first of all, not everybody is even thinking this way. Not all students are, and then not all students have the ability or the time or even resources to do all of these 5 things in depth, which really makes them true Grand Challenge scholars. So in that sense, it's almost become a self-selective thing to create the kind of the engineering leaders of the future, which is only like a 5% or 10% at the most, depending on the institution. So while that is true, there is a little bit of ripple effect for all engineers to learn and be kind of exposed to these thoughts while they are focusing for the most part on being, technically extremely sound and very competent, engineers. So I think you're perfectly right that that's the majority of engineers who are going to be employed. But I think what this is not just engineers, but I would say more even engineering leaders. So I think because of 2 reasons. One is the resources is limited to provide this kind of experience to all students. It's not needed. And secondly, it's kind of a self-selecting the 5% student population itself, which chooses to become like this. So I think the companies which are supporting us, have told us that these are the kind of engineering leaders that they would like to hire, not the majority of engineers that they hire.
Good point. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Rama, for that. Ala, would you like to make some comments from Dubai, from United Arab Emirates?
Sure. Thank you, Krishna. It's very thought-provocative and very inspiring presentation, Rama. Just a few thoughts, and I guess I have the advantage of speaking after the others spoke and expressed their opinions. And I want to say, just as a follow-up to what we heard now, academic rigor, due diligence, theoretical is the theoretical foundation on which the engineers work. But what things such as the Grand Challenges Scholars Program and similar initiatives do is that they put context. This has been lacking in engineering for very, very, very long. For a very long time, and I beg to differ. It shouldn't be only 5% of the students who get engaged in this sort of thinking. Now, maybe 5% will eventually engage and be employed in a context that looks at the social responsibility, the grand challenge, the innovation, the entrepreneurship aspect. Yes, I agree 100%. But I think every single student should have a context within which they understand why we're doing all of what we're doing, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to integrate that in the program, in the undergraduate programs. And in fact, we will be joining the Grand Challenge Scholar Program in the near future at the American University in Dubai here, and we're creating concentrations basically, so students can specialize in the traditional engineering disciplines, but then they can choose a concentration in, sustainable energy, a concentration in water, a concentration in artificial intelligence, and so on, where they actually get a little bit of that context into what they do by choosing courses that map along one of the themes of the Grand Challenges. So you'll be hearing from us, and Rama, you'll probably be hearing from me soon regarding how we can move forward with this.
Oh, great. Fantastic, Ala. That's terrific. So I'm going to read out a comment by Elsie Miao, who could not, who had to leave early, but she has been there for most of the presentation. So she says, wonderfully cohesive presentation, Rama. Can you share what is the role of faculty, deans, administration, and universities in order to participate in the Grand Challenges Scholar Program?
Yeah. So the way that we are saying for this program to be sustainable at various institutions, it has to be blessed by the dean or even the provost, even further up, because it's a cross-disciplinary kind of initiative. So I think we need buy-in and also support from at that level. Then in the case of faculty, the way we enjoy each, let's say major like mechanical, electrical, chemical, etc., which is there. Of course, we are graduating chemical engineers or mechanical engineers. That's for the most part. Those programs still exist. So we would need at least one kind of a member of the steering committee, if you will, from these each individual departments to serve on a advisory board for the institution. So that's how, and you need one champion in each. So that's kind of the framework of how the faculty and the deans are brought at each institution. And this is looked at in the proposal stage, whether there is this kind of support and system that makes it sustainable over a long period. And it has to align with the institutions, each institution's kind of strategic goals, align with that. Otherwise, again, it will fall off by the wayside. So all of these things are kind of looked at when the proposal is, submitted and approved eventually.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go down the list of questions that have come from various other people. So this is Deepak Waikar asking the question: have traditional engineering courses become irrelevant in the context of the fourth industrial revolution?
Okay, I may be a little bit out of my league here, but maybe what I'd like to send is that it's like when VCRs and others came and the DVDs came, they said, oh, movies are going to be irrelevant. But you look at how the revolution of the movies are taking place, people are still flocking to the movies. So I think the classroom kind of teaching where peer-to-peer learning is occurring in a face-to-face situation with the teacher being the guide, etc. I think that role can change, but I don't think it's going to become irrelevant. I think you don't want to replace classes. I think the MOOCs and others are somewhat trying to do some of that, but I would rather say let's kind of enhance the classroom experience with adding other things like what technology and communication revolution has afforded us. So I would say, I hope not.
Yeah, okay. The Krishnamurti says many of the prescriptions emphasize global multicultural nature of tomorrow's engineer, but this how to reconcile with the fact that engineering solutions are necessarily context dependent, that they have to factor in local culture and technology and sociological factors.
Yeah, I hope I stress that enough, because that is very, very important, absolutely important. So it has to, the local ecosystem has to be absolutely there. That's why, the solutions being in plural means its context. That's a socioeconomic, cultural, and so on. So I think that's very important. So I'm sorry if I did not stress it higher and much more.
Okay, Karsten Lensing, you came up with her comment. Karsten, his comment is you came up with a quite socio-technical, context-aware definition of necessary competencies. How should we, as university teachers, foster awareness for things like big data-based learning algorithms using natural language processing to offer pre-filtered, very opaque information needed to make decisions in industry? So do you think we need to adjust information competence or information literature to these challenges?
The challenges are the competencies. I'm not sure what it means. Competency, I think you could add more. It could be part of the technical part. The first part, the creative project experience is more like a technical depth. I put that in one of the slides. That enhances the technical depth. The other ones can enhance more global and other aspects. So in the technical, we have to keep with the times, like with the data revolution and so on. So I think that part can be there. In terms of the challenges themselves, I think the four big themes are the kind of the context of why we are doing something, make it more sustainable, healthy, safe, etc. And the things that you mentioned, data, AI, and maybe nano, bio, etc. technology, those things are all kind of the tools to make that happen. So I would separate out the tools. The tools keep increasing and growing and becoming more sophisticated and all that. But I think the four themes and what engineering should be for the century, that can stay for several decades, I think.
Okay. So a comment from Ravi here. Of course, he wants a copy of the presentation, which we will make it available to everybody through a recording and otherwise after this. Our comment from Ravi is the students, you said students want this and employers want it and colleges have to evolve. What is preventing them, in your opinion, to radically reinvent themselves to similar to how a university has been adapting to change?
Well, I think some people mentioned also earlier, universities are probably the most inertial places to change. I think companies change because of the kind of, otherwise they'll be out of existence. And so that's different. But universities, we have somehow resisted change, and faculty are a good part of that reason, I suppose. But and then in terms of the students, I think that's also evolving in terms of, if you look at 25, 50 years ago, why somebody said wants to be an engineer. You often hear things like, I'm good at science and math, and so I want to go to engineering and get a good paying job, which is challenging technically, that type of stuff. But I think now we hear students saying, I want to change the world, I want to make an impact, and these types of things are added on. Maybe it's the new generations are thinking differently because they're going to be saddled with all the big challenges that was created by the kind of development focus of the 20th century. So I would say that universities have a big role, and I think if you have a feedback from both from the industry and the employers, or even the graduate school where our products, the undergraduates are going to, a feedback loop from them to say how engineering, I mean, education in general, but engineering education in particular has to be transformed. I think that'll be good. More feedback would be better.
I guess they're just like an industry. The universities also should have the fear of going out of business if they don't do the right things. I guess that's what Ravi is trying to hint at.
Yes.
So yeah, next is how do we incorporate the curriculum to build the 5 competencies? Like that goes down to the bricks and mortar here. So you might want to just scratch that a little bit. That largest the curriculum and 5 competencies. Yeah.
Yeah, so as you probably know, the National Academy of Engineering is a very kind of small organization. We are about 30, 40 people in the academy, and so we are not doing the business of creating curriculum. On the other hand, what we just kind of have the universities create the curriculum, and once people become part of this network or even otherwise, they're sharing them. There are conferences, for example, where like ASW, where there are sessions on these types of things, and entrepreneurship is a big theme there. So there is curriculum and other kind of material created. So our job is to kind of facilitate this exchange and be a clearinghouse and connect people with each other so that they can share their expertise, knowledge, and things like that. So I would say that's left mostly to the universities. What curriculum is developed, how they implement it, how they evaluate students, etc. So that I don't know whether that was a satisfactory answer, but that's the
that makes sense. That means you left the details up to the universities, but you've given the outline of the competencies, and that gives them the flexibility to modify curriculum as they see appropriate, and that's great. And then they can share. So Sandeep from India says, how can these Grand Challenges program transform engineering education in India? It's a very broad question. Maybe you can take a shot at commenting on that.
I would say with Krishna's help. So he did organize, early in January, wasn't it, that the meeting in Hyderabad, where there was, and we have 2 universities now which have members. So Nirma University is one which joined, I think February or something like that this year, and then there is Venkateshwara in Vidyaniketan in Tirupati. So those are the 2, but we have KLE from Hubli, IIT Bombay, and so they're exploring. I also talked to Indian Institute of Science, the director, and they said they've started a new undergraduate program there, which is about 400 students. Usually it was only a graduate. So I think there are other institutions, but I think we need much more. And similarly, we need in China and in Japan and other places. But I think it's still very young, and globally the challenges are fact that there are different systems, and to implement such a program, there are different barriers or different challenges that institutionally that they have to solve. So that's it's going to be a tough job, but I think it's worthwhile doing.
Yeah, but just for the information of everybody in the audience, we are some of us are at the ASWE, American Society of Engineering Education annual conference in Tampa, and there's a lot of discussion about these grand challenges happening, presentations by individual faculty and institutions and panel discussions. So there's a lot of energy and excitement around it. So I've been connecting with some of them, and what I'm thinking of doing perhaps is to have different institutions who are making some progress with some examples of how they're doing curriculum, how they're getting students involved. I'm going to maybe try to find a way to come up with a parallel webinar series where we will request some of these institutions to tell us about their experiences, so that people realize that there's no cookie cutter approach to this. Everybody evolves it based on their own local conditions and their own capabilities and interests. But along the broad general guidelines laid out by the National Academy of Engineering. So this is another comment from a faculty member in India. It says maybe the engineering faculty can review the curriculum against the needs of the global grand challenges and adapt them accordingly where it makes sense. And that's that comment from India. Then there is another comment here. Let's see. A specific from Bipin says how to teach engineering students to solve the problems of shortage of drinking water in different parts of the world, especially in countries like Asia and Africa. You have any comments on that specific thrust?
We don't have many institutions from these countries in Africa. So except one from Ghana is proposing a proposal, but they're not there yet. So we certainly need a lot of presence in Africa, in South America as well. We are just starting some workshops there. So I think you're right that there needs to be more done there. But I think one of the ways would be to align with the Sustainable Development Goals, because that, as I mentioned, 200 countries around the world have embraced that as a framework for their respective countries. So I think we can do more by aligning with this, because sometimes I think wrongly this particular program has been viewed as a kind of a US-centric program, and solving or addressing America's issues and stuff like that. But I think that's incorrect. But that perception is there. I've heard that myself, and so I'm trying my best to kind of change that from being more inclusive and more global, etc. So, I think again, it's not an easy process to have. I think what we need also is like a small what do you call it? A core of universities, maybe a few in each continent or each region. That would be, we need that. Once we have that kind of a critical mass, then others can see, yes, it can be done here, and we can adapt it and create our own like that. So, but we need a few kind of early adopters in each of these regions.
Yeah, so there's a participant from Africa. One of the deans from Africa says, how can we as deans, professors, engineering faculty make sure our curriculum keeps change with the exponential changes in technology? I guess it's a very broad question, but you might want to take a shot at it. I think we addressed some of it already in terms of how the deans administrators can get involved. So, so that's.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, Africa, I'm particularly interested because, as Krishna mentioned in the introduction, I was engaged in Africa for more than 2-3 years on infrastructure and other needs, and how engineering education can help also prepare. So I'm very interested. Please send me an email. I know I'm talking to, as I said, KNUST in Ghana. Also, just recently I met with the Gambia people from the ministry there, because they're starting a brand new program under the ACE program, the African Centers for Excellence. So I think combining with African Centers of Excellence would be a great. It's a World Bank funded program, as you probably know. So that would be a great thing. In Tanzania, I'm having discussion with Nelson Mandela African Institute of Science and Technology. So there are a few, but we need many more.
Okay, here's a comment from Norway, Kongsberg, Norway. This is by Meskenstad. The buzzword in Norway, it says, is applied autonomy. So I don't see how this is important to the Ramakrishna's version of Maslow. Does autonomy really contribute directly to the survival of the planet, or should engineering efforts be channeled elsewhere? This is Lydia and Kongsberg.
I'm afraid I don't fully understand, but what I heard one of the talks recently says, how to be happy is what the title of this talk. Mm-hmm. This is by this, Hitachi CTO and the fellow. It was in Japan, and he said the best way to be happy is make other people happy. so I think so. Self-actualization can also involve society in that sense.
Okay, great. So with that, I think we have one. Tony Smith has actually sent me a link saying that worthwhile initiatives, showcasing some initiatives, worthwhile initiatives in the Facebook. So I'll just forward it to put it in the recording, so it'll probably be show up. So thank you all. This has been a terrific discussion. In particular, I want to thank Rama for taking the time to enlighten us on all these things. And as I mentioned, we will be following up with some parallel webinars on the Grand Challenges that programs at various locations all over the world. So if you have a Grand Challenges program, if you are part of a Grand Challenges program already, please email me and so that we can give you a chance to to make some to share with others. So this will be a parallel series of webinars, because the IFES global webinar is already every 2 weeks that's going to go on, and it's already been booked all the way till February. But what we want to be doing is in parallel have others on specific things like the grand challenges, by sharing by faculty and colleges and what they're doing, so that gives everybody opportunity to really get to the nuts and bolts of how to make these things happen. So once again, thank you, and good day, good morning, good evening, good night, whichever part of the world you're in. A recording of this will be sent to you folks, and once see you in a couple of weeks for the next IFES global webinar. Thank you, Rama.
Thank you so much, Krishna.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for participating.